Hello, and welcome to the 15th installment of KRAD COVID Readings. I'm Keith R.A. DeCandido, and for this 15th episode, I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to be doing a longer piece of short fiction, but not all at once, in 5 installments over the course of this week, starting today, obviously. In my Dragon Precinct universe, which is a fantasy police procedural, the two main characters are Danthres Tresyllione and Torin Wyvald, who are detectives in the city of Cliff's End. They solve crimes in an epic fantasy setting. So the setting is high fantasy: humans, elves, dwarves, wizards, magic, that kind of thing. But the stories are cop stories. So I usually sell it as Law and Order meets Lord of the Rings. One reviewer called it Dungeons and Dragnet. And in the main stories, which are told mostly in novels and also in short stories, Torin and Danthres have been partners for 10 years. Back in 2012, I decided to tell the story of how they first got together 10 years previously. I did it as a crowdfund. It was actually my first crowdfund that I did over Kickstarter, and was very successful, and I've done a bunch of stories in the Dragon Precinct setting through crowdfunding since then. And then it was later reprinted here in Tales from Dragon Precinct. It was called When the Magick Goes Away. It was Danthres and Torin's first case, where they first met. And I'm going to read it here for you now, at least the first 2 parts. It's a novelette that's divided into 10 chapters, and I will be doing 2 chapters per day over the course of this week. So I hope you enjoy this. When the Magick Goes Away by Keith R.A. DeCandido. Danthres and Torin's first case. Court. No matter how many decades he lived as a wizard, and he'd lived plenty by this point, Tam Court never grew tired of drinking ale in a tavern. Of late, his preferred drinking hole of choice was the Stone Kobold, located on Axe Lane, in the port town of Cliff's End. One of Court's magic shops was located in Cliff's End, and his employees had spoken highly of the place. Court had been coming here for a few years now, ever since the people of the northern city-state of Yaren, where another of his shops was located, learned he was a wizard. That took all the fun out of it. When people knew you were a magic user, they bowed, they scraped, they sucked up, and they generally stopped treating you like a person. Court came to a bar so he could listen to stories and enjoy the company of people. Wizards weren't people. Court had spent enough time as a member of the Brotherhood of Wizards to understand that to be a fact. In fact, he'd figured out that little truism after spending about an hour with the mage he was apprenticed to, the old bastard. But as he hoisted his 3rd, or was it his 4th, ale, Court didn't think about being a wizard. He just thought about having a good time. And then, said a dwarf, who was sitting on the stool next to Court, his legs swinging in the air even as he gesticulated in the energetic telling of his tale. The stupid bastard starts playing the lute! Of course, it sounds like utter shit, and I finally had to grab the thing and smash it against the wall. That's when all the coins came pouring out of it and onto the floor. A brown-haired human woman, on the other side of the dwarf, asked, "He thought you were paying him with a lute?" "To be fair," a bald, thick-bearded human next to Court said, "in the hands of a great bard, a lute's of tremendous value." Gava, the tall, beautiful woman behind the bar, laughed and said, "That leaves Sam's lute out, then." Court also laughed. "I'll drink to that." Sam was the bard who performed at the Stone Kobold thrice weekly, and Court endeavored mightily to make sure that his trips to the Kobold were on one of the other 4 days. His imbibing in honor of Sam's awful bardistry was enough to finish his current flagon, and he placed it down on the bar and asked Gava for another. She held the flagon under the spigot of the ale barrel, then handed it back, saying, "This one's on the house." Eyes widening, Court asked, to what do I owe the privilege?" "You're just about the only gentleman in here," Gava said with a bright smile. "Certainly the only regular. You always tip well, and you're the only person who's never tried to get me to sleep with them." Were they not in Court's current favorite bar, he might have told Gava that wizards were encouraged to tamp down their sexuality in order to focus on the magic. Strong emotions like lust and love played merry hell with the spells. Not that all wizards lived up to that notion, as Court had learned the hard way. "Actually, lutes can be of even greater value than gold," said a deep-voiced man from the other side of the bar. He had long red hair, and he either had become too lazy to shave or was in the midst of growing a beard. The dwarf spit his ale in surprise. "Are you mad? Nothing's of more value than gold." "Value is circumstantial," the red-haired man said. "During the war, I spent a winter in the Nemirian wastes. Gold would, at that point, have been of far less use than a lute, as a lute can be used for kindling." Everyone chuckled at that one. Another dwarf, who sat at a table near the bar, stared at the red-haired man. "You fought for the king and queen against the elf bitch, did you?" He nodded. "I served under General Osric in the 17th Company for 3 years, until the elf queen finally abdicated her throne." The dwarf grinned. "Ha! I served in the Elmgren Regiment of the Dwarven Army. You must have fought at Hobgoblin's Run." "Indeed I did. Torin Ben Wyvald." He held up his flagon. "Zorbanig," the dwarf replied, doing likewise. "A pleasure." "You know," the bearded man next to Court said, "Osric's here in Cliff's End now. He's running the castle guard." "So I've heard," Ben Wyvald said with a smile. The other dwarf, who'd told the story about the lute, asked, "What happened at Hobgoblin's Run?" Court sighed. He hated war stories, but they were becoming increasingly common as more and more ex-soldiers started pouring into Cliff's End. Some came here due to lack of work. Others used Cliff's End the way so many did, as a way station. The city-state had the busiest port in all of Flingaria. And all of them had stories to tell about the Elven Wars. It grew tiresome. Still, Court gulped down his ale while trying to at least pretend to be interested in the story that Ben Wyvald and Zorbanig told about their battle, though Court noticed that the former did most of the talking. "You tell your story well, Torin Ben Wyvald," the brunette 2 stools down from Court said after he got to the part where the elves retreated. "Perhaps Gava should hire you as the new bard." Gava shook her head. "Sadly, that's not my choice, and we're still stuck with the old bard." "Of course," Zorbanig said. "You lot were lucky we showed up, otherwise your sorry asses would have been routed by those pointy-eared bastards." "That is certainly possible," Ben Wyvald said before sipping some more ale. Zorbanig slammed his flagon down upon the table and stood up. "You calling me a liar, human?" "Not at all. As I said, it's possible you're right, and we might have lost the day without your arrival. Since you did show up, we shall never know." Court was impressed with Ben Wyvald's deft but gentle attempt to defuse the situation. Sadly, the attempt failed, as Zorbanig then stomped toward Ben Wyvald angrily, elbowing the bearded human next to Court as he strode by. "Hey! Watch it, shorty!" The human took a clumsy swing that cleared Zorbanig's head by 2 hands' lengths, then stumbled forward into another table, spilling half a dozen drinks while doing so. The 4 burly humans sitting there did not look pleased. One grabbed the human by the head. Zorbanig yelled, "Fight! Fight!" Court had very little memory of what happened after that, beyond a flail of arms, legs, and ale, both within and without its containers. For his part, he muttered a shield spell that kept him safe from harm. Within a minute, the melee was over, as most of the kobold's patrons were lying on the floor, breathing heavily, crying in pain, or moaning softly. The exceptions were Ben Wyvald, who appeared to have comported himself well in the fight, standing over the 2 of the large humans from the table next to Zorbanig's, and Court himself. Turning to the bar, Court said, "Gava, you better..." But of Gava, he saw no sign. Ben Wyvald was peering over the bar. "I'm afraid she is unlikely to answer, sir." Looking over, Court saw that Gava lay prone on the floor, blood trickling from her mouth and from the wound formed by the ornate dagger lodged in her chest. Quain. Lieutenant Quain struggled to throw the cloak on over his neck and in very short order found himself tangled in it. The brown cloak with the griffin crest emblazoned on the back that symbolized his new rank as a lieutenant in the Cliff's End Castle Guard now covered his entire face. That, at least, spared him the indignity of watching his fellow detectives laugh hysterically, not to mention whatever dire look his new partner was giving him. You could hear the laughter, though. Plus Nail saying, "Bravo! Well done, Quain! Well done!" Once he finally managed to disentangle himself from the cloak and place it properly, he looked over at his partner. "Are you quite finished?" she asked. She stared dolefully at him. Her bizarrely constructed face was the result of a human-elven pairing, but she was much uglier than the half-elf prostitute in that place on Sandy Brook Way that he visited last year. "Yes, Lieutenant Tresyllione," he said quickly. She winced. "It's Lieutenant Tresyllione. Will you just call me Danthres and have done with it, you stupid shitbrain?" "Sorry, Lieutenant. I mean, Danthres!" He followed her toward the exit from the squad room, leaving the snickering of the other 4 detectives, as well as Sergeant Newcastle. Quain had to follow Danthres as he hadn't yet learned his way around the castle. In fact, when she made a left out of the squad room, Quain cried, "Left!" a bit louder than he should have. Danthres stopped, closed her eyes, and turned on her partner. "Oh, Lord and Lady Quain, will you just follow me? You don't need to express surprise at everything that doesn't go as you planned. You're a detective now, and I guarantee that nothing will go as planned. You'll just exhaust yourself from all that shock. Don't worry. You'll learn your way around the castle eventually." I know, Lieutenant. I mean, Danthres." Quain shook his head. "I'm sorry, but I was assigned to Unicorn and Mermaid, and I never really got up here to the castle much, except for that ceremony and that other—" "Quain!" Recoiling as if slapped, Quain stammered, I'm sorry! I just—" She held up a hand. "Stop talking! Now!" Quain stopped talking. With that, Danthres turned and continued out of the castle. They walked in silence out of the portcullis and onto Mirka Way. Exiting the castle, which was deemed Griffin Precinct, they traversed into the city proper. Quain had always found Lord Albin and Lady Mirka's method of dividing up the city-state to be genius. He tried to remember the borders of each precinct. From the castle to, was it Pine Path? Anyhow, that was Unicorn Precinct, where the wealthiest citizens of Cliff's End resided. That was where Quain had served as a rookie in the guard, taking complaints from annoying rich people. Between there and Axe Way was the middle-class district of Dragon Precinct, with the slums between Axe Way and the docks serving as Goblin Precinct. The Docklands themselves were Mermaid Precinct, and it was Quain's cleverness in helping figure out who hijacked the Fool's Gold that led to his promotion when Lieutenant Bergen quit the guard rather suddenly. It wasn't until his 3rd day on the job as a lieutenant that Sergeant Newcastle informed him that Bergen had quit rather than continue to be partnered with Danthres, and that Quain was now her 6th partner since her own promotion almost half a year earlier. As they passed Oak Way, Quain cursed himself. Pine Path, indeed. It was Oak Way that served as the demarcation between Unicorn and Dragon. He should have remembered that. They reached Axe Lane, not Axe Way, damn it, and turned left until they reached the Stone Kobold. Forbin was on guard outside the tavern. Quain nodded at him. "Hey there, Quain," Forbin said, then more formally to Danthres. "Ma'am?" Danthres looked back and forth from Forbin to Quain. "You two know each other?" Nodding, Quain said, "We came up in Unicorn together. Remember that gnome that kept trying to peek into Lady Mervain's bedchamber?" That got a chuckle out of Forbin. "Indeed. No matter how many times we cast his tiny form into the hole." Quain grinned. He wasn't entirely sure why the dungeons beneath the castle and the holding cells in the precincts were collectively called the Hole, but that name had been part of the guard's lexicon since he joined, so he called them that too, since he didn't want to look like an idiot. At least, not like more of an idiot than he had been since being promoted. Danthres snarled, "If you two are done with your hilarious reminiscing about your soft duty in Unicorn, we have a case." "Well, with respect, ma'am, that's why they put the rookies there, because it is, as you say, soft." "I wouldn't know," Danthres said. "When I first joined up, I was assigned to Goblin." Quain watched Forbin's eyes go wide, which was the way he himself had reacted when Danthres had informed him of the same thing. That was not standard procedure for the castle guard. Danthres stared at Forbin intently. What have we got? A bar brawl, much like any other bar brawl. I have not questioned any of the participants, though I overheard one person mention that a dwarf started it. There are a couple of dwarves inside, by the way. In the end, the bartender was found with a knife in her chest. Danthres folded her arms. I'm impressed. That's more than I usually get out of a guard. Please tell me you haven't let anyone leave. Shaking his head so fast, Quain wondered if it would turn all the way around. Forbin said, No, ma'am. Everyone's still present and accounted for. Well, at least since I arrived shortly after I received word of the fight. I can't guarantee that someone didn't depart the premises before my arrival. Good enough. She stormed past Forbin and went into the stone kobold. Forbin glanced sidelong at Quain. She's a fun one, isn't she? Quain just shuddered and went inside as well. As soon as they entered the bar itself, everyone started speaking at once. The bar was mostly populated with humans, as well as a smattering of dwarves. No elves or gnomes or halflings or any other species that Quain could see. Quiet! Danthres yelled, her voice echoing off the kobold's wooden walls. Everyone shut up. Quain wondered if they put her on crowd control when she was a guard in Goblin. Everyone stay where you are. We need to look at the victim, then we will be questioning you one by one. Where's the body? Several of the patrons pointed to the other side of the bar, located against the back wall. Danthres walked to it, moving past the tables that were shoved haphazardly about the floor. Quain followed, then stumbled, as he kept crashing into tables that Danthres somehow nimbly avoided. They got around to the other side of the bar. Looking down, Quain saw a blonde-haired human woman. Her tunic was darkened by the blood, pooling beneath her from around the dagger, jutting out of her chest. Her eyes just stared upward without blinking. The blood looked like it was everywhere, and suddenly Quain's entire being was focused on the nausea that welled up from his belly into his throat. Turning, he ran toward the front door and barely made it out before throwing up right onto Forbin's boots. Damnation, Quain, do you know how much they charge us for a laundry spell on boots? Quain stood hunched over, hands on knees, trying to get his breathing under control. His lips were caked with puke. His mouth tasted like something died in it. Pointedly, he ignored Forbin's question. Given what was on the ground in Cliff's End, his puke was the least of what was staining Forbin's boots on a given day. Wiping his mouth with his glove, he stood upright, took a very deep breath, and walked back in. Danthres was standing just on the other side of the door. Lord and Lady Quain, is this your first dead body? Swallowing down the leftover bile, Quain nodded. How did you... Oh, never mind. I don't even want to know. She pointed at the table. Go sit down. She turned around and looked at the assembled multitudes before pointing at a human woman. You, come over here. The woman came over and sat down opposite Quain, Danthres taking a seat between them. Tell me, she said, what happened? She shrugged. Dunno. Some dwarf and that man over yonder. She pointed at a red-haired man seated at the bar. We're telling war stories. Next thing I know, everyone's gone mad. Which dwarf? The woman looked about. Dunno. Ain't here no more. Said his name was Zubering or somehat. Did you see who killed the bartender? Her name's Gava. She was a good woman. Quain said, I'm sorry for your loss. Danthres shot him a look. The woman said, it's everyone's loss. The bartender's in this dump of shit brains, but she knows how to pour. Anyhow, I didn't see who killed her, and if I did, I'd have cut him myself. Once they were done with her, Danthres called a human man over. He said more or less the same thing, though he had no idea what the dwarf's name was. Then a dwarf, who said that the dwarf who started the brawl was named Zorbanig. Then an older human man. I come in fairly regularly, the man said. My name's Tam Court, and I don't know who Zorbanig was, except that he was a dwarf who fought in the war. But I've never seen him before. Of course, I've never seen Mr. Van Wyvald over there either, but he didn't sneak out while the brawl was going on. Danthres frowned. You're sure he left then? Court hesitated. Not entirely, but I didn't see him at all after the fight ended. Stands to reason. Also, he and another person, a human, seemed to have some sort of prearranged movement where Zorbanic bumped him and the man swung over his head and stumbled into a table with a bit of deliberate clumsiness. "I can't help but notice that you're uninjured," Danthres said. Quain shook his head. He hadn't even noticed that. Everyone else in the place at least had the beginnings of a bruise, if not a cut or two, except for this court gentleman. Court smiled sheepishly. "I'm afraid I'm of little use in a fight, and I'm a tremendous physical coward. I kept my head down and didn't engage." Danthres then summoned the red-haired man over. "Greetings, lieutenants. My name is Torin Ben Wyvald, and the person you wish to speak to is named Zorbanic. He's a dwarf, completely bald with a mark on the left side of his head. His beard is brown with some gray and very thick." Danthres blinked. "That's quite a bit of detail." Ben Wyvald shrugged. "I was suspicious of him. He claimed to be from the Elmgren Regiment, which fought alongside my own 17th Company at Hobgoblin's Run. But his remembrances seemed vague at best, and when I mentioned Captain Birrock's big charge, he nodded and said he remembered it well." Danthres smirked. "I take it that Captain Birrock did not charge during that battle." Smirking right back, Ben Wyvald said, "That would be rather difficult, since he'd been dead for a month by the time Hobgoblin's Run occurred." The smirk fell. "After I finished the story, he picked a fight, despite all my attempts to diffuse his anger. And then he and a compatriot appeared to deliberately provoke a table full of men." "You seem to notice a great deal," Danthres said slowly. "You seem suspicious of that, Lieutenant. Can you give me a good reason why I shouldn't be?" Quain frowned. Danthres was talking like this man was a suspect, which was absurd given how cooperative he was. "I can, as it happens. I was raised in Miverin, and trained to be observant of my surroundings at all times." "Miverin's real?" Quain blurted out. "I always thought it was a myth." "So did I," Danthres said. "Certainly people who voluntarily leave Miverin are." "An odd statement," Ben Wyvald replied, "from someone who voluntarily left Sorlin." "Now," Danthres smoldered. Quain found himself slowly nudging his chair away from her. Sorlin was one of those places in the south that Quain had heard stories about. Something about elves experimenting on humans, maybe? But he wasn't sure of the reality. He had no idea that Danthres was from there, or indeed if she really was. But Ben Wyvald just mentioning the place obviously pissed her off. Tightly, Danthres said, "We're not here to discuss me, Mr. Van Wyvald, but the bar brawl and the murder of a woman. I'm afraid 2 of the brawlers occupied my attention to their detriment, so I did not witness the murder. However, you may be able to obtain assistance from the man you interviewed before me." Quain blinked. "Mr. Cord already told us everything he knows." "No, shitbrain, he didn't," Danthres said dismissively. "He merely answered what we asked him." "Did he tell you that he's a wizard?" Ben Wyvald asked. Now Quain's jaw dropped. "He's not a wizard." I'm afraid I must agree with my idiot partner," Danthres said. "Wizards generally announce themselves." "I can't speak to why this court gentleman hid his true nature, but he spent the entire fight sitting on his stool at the bar, and was left completely untouched by it, even as all those around him were caught up in whether they wished to be or not. That could only have been accomplished by a spell he cast." "That's amazing," Quain muttered. Danthres gave her partner a withering look. Hardly. He could have bought a shield spell. But Ben Wyvald shook his head and pointed at the doorway to the stone kobold. Turning around, Quain saw a sigil painted on the wall over the doorframe, though he had no idea what it meant. "That symbol," Ben Wyvald said, "can be found on most reputable taverns throughout—" Yes, Danthres said with a sigh. Quain swallowed. "I've never seen it before." "It's a ward, shitbrain." Danthres gave him another of her withering stares. Quain was already growing tired of them. "It prevents any store-bought magic from working where it's placed, but it won't stop natural magic, so wizards can still function where that ward appears." At this point, Quain's head was swimming, as he hadn't known any of this. All right, then, if he is a wizard, how does that help us?" "During the war, there was a court-martial of a soldier who claimed that a fellow soldier had been killed by an enemy scout, but nobody had seen this scout. There happened to be a wizard in camp, and he offered to cast a spell called Inanimate Residue. It can tell the wizard what has happened to certain inanimate objects, to peel back time on that object and reveal its past." Frowning, Quain repeated himself. "How does that help us?" Danthres was leaning forward. "The spell can be cast in a room?" told me it could. Certainly can't hurt to ask this court person if he is capable of such. Assuming, Danthres said with a smile, that he is a wizard. Ben Wyvald smiled right back. Assuming. You admit you might be wrong? Danthres tilted her head quizzically. Of course, Ben Wyvald said matter-of-factly. I'm only guessing. I might be mistaken, and Court may simply be a very talented coward. That was, in fact, what he claimed, Danthres said. We shall see. And I'm impressed. Most men would never admit to the possibility of being wrong. Well, then it would seem I am not like most men. Danthres snorted. Doubtful. Is there anything else you wish to add? Shrugging, Ben Wyvald said, only that the woman was obviously targeted, and Zorbanik's purpose was to provide a distraction that would allow him or someone else to kill her. You sure of that? Quain asked. Danthres looked up to the ceiling in supplication, and Quain realized he'd screwed up yet again. Lord and Lady, you stupid shitbrain, of course that's what happened. Gava was very carefully stabbed right in the chest, where she'd be guaranteed to die almost instantly. That type of precision doesn't happen in a bar fight. Quain started, but Danthres had already gotten up and walked over to Court. After following her progress across the tavern, Ben Wyvald turned to Quain. Is she always so direct? Quain snorted. That's the polite way of putting it. I've only been partnered with her for a short while. He wasn't sure he'd be partnered with her for much longer, though he didn't say that out loud. Thanks for your cooperation, he added, as he rose and went after her. She was now standing in front of Court. Tell me, Mr. Court, are you a wizard? Several of the other people in the tavern laughed at that. He ain't no wizard. Court ain't no more a mage than I am. Like a magic user'd ever be caught dead in this place. Court, however, just sighed. How did you know? More expressions of shock and disbelief and outrage. Quain was about to explain that Ben Wyvald had figured it out, but Danthres talked over him. That doesn't matter. What does matter is whether or not you are capable of casting an inanimate residue spell. Instead of answering directly, Court just stared at Danthres. For her part, Danthres stared right back. Quain had to look away, but neither lieutenant nor wizard did. Finally, Court sighed. Now I'll have to find a new tavern. Again. Is that a yes? Yes, it's a yes. I'll need everyone to depart this tavern. The spell will only work if there's nothing alive in the space. But, Quain said, aren't you alive? Danthres barked and laughed. Congratulations, shitbrain. That's the first smart thing you've said in your entire life. The spellcaster obviously can be present, Court said slowly. If we're to do this, let's get it over with, so I can find a new tavern to patronize. I'll need half an hour to cast the spell. Looking at Quain, Danthres said, let's clear the place out. Stunned that she didn't call him shitbrain that time, Quain started to herd people out of the Stone Kobold. Within a few minutes, they cleared everyone onto Axe Lane. They were all muttering various importunings about how surprised they were that Court was a mage. With a sigh, Danthres looked at Forbin. All right, I see no reason to stand around for half an hour, so you stay here, and when the wizard there is finished, escort him to the castle. Forbin started. Is there a problem? Danthres asked in a tone that made it abundantly clear that the answer to that question needed to be no. Forbin, however, did not catch the tone, or, more suicidally, didn't care. Ma'am, I'm afraid I'm off shift in a quarter hour, and Sergeant Alvin made it abundantly clear that we cannot have overtime. Danthres put her head in her hands. Then send someone to Dragon and get a replacement. With that, Danthres stormed off. Quain gave Forbin a quick shrug, and then ran to catch up with her. As soon as he did so, Danthres said, You are utterly useless in there, shitbrain. Osric keeps insisting that I must have a partner, but a tree would have been more beneficial than you. At least it would provide shade. Quain instinctively wanted to be outraged. That was the 6th time she'd called him a shitbrain today, and he was sick of it. But he couldn't muster up that outrage, because in the back of his head he knew that she was absolutely right. For all that he'd been clever on the Fool's Gold case, he wasn't, it seemed, cut out to be a detective. That Ben Wyvald fellow was of more use to the investigation than he. To be continued tomorrow. Thank you very much for watching. Please tune in tomorrow for the 2nd installment of When the Magic Goes Away. And check me out online, DeCandido.net, DeCandido.wordpress.com, and patreon.com/KRAD. The latter has all sorts of nifty content for you at various levels of support. And thank you very much, and please, please, please stay safe. Oh, and subscribe to the channel, please. It'll make it easier so you'll know when the next thing comes. Thanks.